why the Victrola and music technology was going to be the death of music, and one of his very smart theories was that it would lead to vocal cords not existing in human beings anymore. Smart, real smart. He was on something there. So, summarizing, all of these four businesses start very messy, and over the course of 40 years or so, they evolved into this. And this is basically what 20th century looks like as we're heading into digital. Very well-defined content and distribution businesses with specific areas of focus. There are people who create movies, there are other people who distribute movies, there are people who make television programming, then there are companies that distribute it, and so on. Make sense so far? Yes. Okay, good. So, as a consequence of that, we see this kind of thing that people talk about a lot, which is the decline, this massive shrink in the number of companies that control media across the world. So there are 50 US major media companies in 1983. 20 years later, there are 5 or 6, probably 7, but still, that's a pretty big drop. Why? It's because what we just looked at. All of the drive is about finding models that work, and the companies that can define how do we turn content into a business, how do we turn this piece of distribution into a business, they wind up buying up or driving the other companies in the space out of business, and so over time there's this massive consolidation. And that continues basically through today. And so we wind up in a situation where, at least in the States, the vast majority of media is controlled by 6 companies that are multinational. I don't know if you can read that, but that's Disney, Time Warner, Viacom, News Corp, Comcast, the largest television distributor in the United States, which now owns NBC Networks and Universal Pictures, and Sony. So if you do business in Hollywood or in the States in media, you're going to largely be doing business with some combination of pieces of these 6 companies. And the combination, as you probably know, looks like that. Disney begins as a company that does mouse cartoons, and today owns many things, including ESPN, which we had a great presentation from, and I will return back to later. But also comic books, Pixar, the other animation company, theme parks, and internet group, etc. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, notice I talked about film, I talked about print, and I talked about music. Which one didn't I talk about? Television. And the reason that I argue TV is different is because unlike those other media, in TV, at the birth of television, it cannot be wrong. In other words, if people go into a store and they buy a television set, and they can get CBS, but they can't get NBC, that's really bad for everybody. There's not as much room to figure it out as you go along and make it up. It has to work. And so there is, from the very beginning, US government is involved. There's the creation of standards, whether it's NTSC or PAL, but everybody sort of works these technical standards that have to be adapted by hardware companies and software companies, or what we would call software companies today, the content companies. And so very quickly, the history of television is the prototypes are developed in the 20s. There's some developed in Italy, some developed in many places in the world. In the United States, it's in the early 40s that there becomes a standard. Broadcast television in the United States really kicks off in the late 40s, and it pretty much is a stable business until other forms of distribution come along in the 70s. Then the 90s, satellite becomes a consumer platform. And then, around 2000 or so, all hell breaks loose with the new methods of the internet, which we'll talk about. So this first thing, which I call television 1.0, is the word is broadcast television, right? Still true here, over the air. It's a great word because it means what it says, broad. The business model and the creative model is all about reaching as many people at one time as possible. The other major aspects of this, whether you're a creative person or a business person, by the way, how many of you are business people, and how many of you are creative, content creators? Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you're in business or creative, for everybody, the objective is the same, to create shows that can reach massive audiences. And as an example, I don't want to go in, are you familiar with the rating system, more or less? Okay, so just roughly, ratings are equivalent to 1% of the households that are in a home. So as an example of the way that that's changed, in the 50s, I Love Lucy had something like a 67% rating, meaning that 67% of those televisions were watching one show. By contrast, American Idol, big show, big network show, at its height was doing maybe an 11 or 12. So what we see is that, as you know, the ratings, the number of people watching those top shows goes down. But even before internet video shows up, there's something else going on, which is the number of choices that people have is going way up. And I think this is a real key to people starting new companies or creating new content, that it's really worth understanding. I'm just going to check my time real quick. Okay, we're great. So even before the internet, there are all these possibilities of new shows. Why is that happening? And it's happening because of something that we'll call TV 2.0, which you know, which is the cable model. But the real power of the cable model is that instead of being advertiser-driven, or being a la carte, single-use purchase, it's subscription-driven. So what happens is, because people are paying monthly revenues for every network that they get, the producers can be funded in advance because there's going to be money coming on into the future, right? If you have ESPN in your cable package this month, you're going to almost definitely have it next month. So broadcasters or networks, cable networks, can pay more for shows and for sports rights and things like this. So the number of programs that can be funded skyrockets. Because of that, you need a smaller audience because there's more money coming in from these networks. So you don't need to have MASH or Dallas or Dynasty or whatever. You can begin to target, even before the internet, a smaller audience and make something that's profitable. So just really quickly, around the time that the internet is just starting, this move from the broadcast world in media to the cable move has really taken root. Now you have many more choices. The audiences can be smaller. The user has to pay. It's more expensive. But in return, you're going to get a product that is going to give you more choices. Okay? Another interesting thing about TV that I think about a lot when I see business plans for new services and things. People tend to look at new services or new television show ideas, and you always want to put a label on everything. But here's the interesting thing about television. What does it even mean, right? So if you start to think, what is television? This is the International Television Festival. What is television, right? So depending on when you ask, it used to be something that came over the air, then it was over the air or cable, then over the air cable satellite, it was 3 networks, blah, 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 blah. It was this thing in your living room. What do we know about all of those things? None of them are true. They're all gone. Then, sort of more recently, the definition that people would use, whether they were business people, network people, or whatever, is they would say, oh, it's something that you get as a 10-foot experience, as opposed to going to a movie theater, a cinema, where it was further away, or watching it on your mobile, which is like a 2-feet thing. And it was something you did with other people, blah, 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 blah. Guess what? None of these things are true. TV isn't any of these things. So what does television even mean? And so what I would argue is that it's a system. Television is really, really powerful and had an advantage over film and print and music because it was a system where there was a real emphasis on this segment, paying this segment, who paid this segment, and these people being responsible for this piece, and this responsible for another, and so on. And what's interesting about that is, all of that still remains true, in a way. All of that is still important, but everything else, the distribution mechanism, making the supply small, all of that is blown away. All that you have left is that system that's sort of been baked into the TV business. And so now, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are now. And you can ignore most of these numbers, but I'm going to give you a quick example of why the TV business is so incredibly profitable relative to other media businesses. And so, just as an example, do you have Comedy Central? Do you have some Comedy Central content here? Okay, so I'm just going to use Comedy Central. Do you want me to show you, go through how the TV business actually pays people? Is that useful? Yeah. Okay, so this is how it really works. I teach this in my class at university. Most people don't get taught this, but I think it's really powerful. So for example, we'll use Comedy Central, but basically here's how it works. If you have cable or satellite, you pay a certain amount of money per month. That cable or satellite company then pays to every network that they carry a certain amount. So in this particular thing, you don't have to bother to read it, I know it's small. Comedy Central in 2009 was getting paid 13 cents a month. Meaning that if you pay 200 real or whatever you paid for cable, the equivalent of 13 US cents was going back to Viacom on Comedy Central. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that, you don't have to read this one either, don't worry about it. This basically says, this is national cable data from the US, Comedy Central's in about 100 million US pay homes. So, therefore, Comedy Central is worth about 155 million US dollars just in subscription revenue a year, give or take. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. Okay, you're with me? Good. So what do we know from that? That a company that owned 15, I'm just making this up, but it's close enough. Let's just say that a company owned 15 cable networks like this, a Viacom or Comcast NBCU or whatever. That would be worth about $3.6 billion in cash flow before advertising, before anything else, a year. And remember, this is subscription revenue. So as long as not too many more people quit than join, this money is going to be consistent. It doesn't matter if it's a depression or a recession or whatever, unlike advertising, which goes up and down. Is it Christmas? Is it not Christmas? Blah, 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 blah. This is 12 months a year, every year. And going back to one of the earlier speakers, just as an example, one of the reasons that ESPN is so incredibly powerful, that's not an exact number, but it's close enough. ESPN, if I were to put the prices of these, you know, I said 13 cents a month for Comedy Central. If we were to look at the prices per network, which we don't have time to do, they would basically look like this, and then we would get to sports, and they would go like that, and then they would get to ESPN, and they would go like that. Because sports is incredibly valuable, and it's a very consistent revenue stream. So to give you a comparison, I'm going to end this section, but why this is also powerful going into the future. If I leave you with one thing today, by far the most valuable things in the media business in the world, period, are cable networks. As an example, in the US in 2010, that subscription revenue that I described, coming back from households to companies, was about 135 billion a year, maybe 140 billion. Google's revenue that year was 28 billion. It's a lot of money. The cable business is incredibly profitable. So now I'm going to sort of give you an example of what that means as we go into this new world. But before I do that, there's you have a lot of discussions here in Brazil about crowdfunding and kickstarting and new methods of funding? No. Okay, not so much. Okay. Well, in the U.S. this has become a very popular topic. In other words, if all of us want to see a show about something, can somebody collect the money from us as investors or fans or whatever, and then make the show themselves? This is an extremely popular topic when you speak to entrepreneurs or sometimes new companies. Here's the problem. This is a show called Breaking Bad. I think you have it, yeah? Okay. If you don't have that money that I just showed from Comcast and DirecTV, that monthly subscription revenue coming in, then there is no money to make Breaking Bad. None of the new shows that have sort of created this new, really interesting era of television in the world, all of that is coming from these companies, so there has to be a new way of working that out. And so now I'm just going to quickly go through, sort of from very recent examples, two things about how the old and the new have merged, and how really smart, really creative, one is going to be how a really smart, creative guy took advantage of this new model to make a show that never would have gotten made otherwise, and it became a big hit. And the other one is to show how, from the perspective of a big media company, the fear sort of, the mindset of how to work with online video has sort of come along. So before I do that, are there any questions? Okay, I'll keep going. So I'll give you one example. A few years ago, we had a situation where, you don't have Hulu here yet, do you? Okay, you know what it is? Okay, so Hulu is an online video service. And so a very popular show called The Daily Show on the Comedy Central in the US was pulled off of Viacom, was pulled off of this online video service. And there was a lot of discussion and people were very angry. But just using sort of the example that I just used, I'm going to show you why there is this discussion of when things can be online and when they can't. So remember I said it's 13 cents per subscriber per month for Comedy Central? Okay? So what that means is that it's basically 155 million in money coming back to whoever owns that network. So here has traditionally been the fear of sort of the old school, old way of doing things. If that network was worth $155 million, and let's just say that this network cost, that network was 13 cents a month. Let's just say that whoever's ever paying for the network, whether it was a cable company or a satellite company, or maybe you as the consumer saying, hey, I don't want to pay that much for that network because I can already watch it on the internet, okay? Let's just say that that meant that that company was going to get 1 cent US less per month from each subscriber. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but actually that 1 cent a month that they could lose if more content went online and they couldn't make money from it would work out to about 12 million US a year. And so let's just say that there was a show, a really inexpensive, a cheap reality show that cost 500,000 US an episode to make. That's a real cheap show. That's about 22 episodes of a show that would come out of that network's budget. So the fear has been, and it's not a smart fear in a lot of ways, that if more stuff becomes online before they can make money on it, then they will just be able to make fewer shows, create more content, blah, 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 blah. So that's sort of the first place that this battleground of online video really hit the sort of Hollywood business. But because it was so powerful, it couldn't really be stopped. Eventually, Hulu wound up paying a lot more money for that network, and the show came back on. But that's sort of like an example in the media business of how these things are thought through. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. Okay, good. So now I'm going to give you another pretty real and pretty current example. So there's a guy, and he's got a show, and he's a very successful maker of television. He's a very successful maker of shows in Hollywood, and so he wants to make a show that costs about the same amount of money. And so he goes to a bunch of networks and he says, I want to make this show and it's going to cost about 30 million US. What is the show about? Well, it's set in the past. Is there sex? No. Is there bad language? No. So is it a big audience? No. All of the reasons that you could traditionally make a show are not necessarily there for a big network. So then he thinks, there's this network in the US called AMC, American Movie Classics, and it is, they show mainly old movies, and they charge about 23 cents a month. And so the argument that this guy uses for making the show is, this show may not help you necessarily make more money at first, but it will create for you a completely new audience. You will become a very first-class network, and you will be able to make a lot more money. So in that old model of media, that doesn't make any sense because it's not immediate money. But in this new model where the value of that brand is going to increase, it's very interesting. So this network, AFC, says, okay, you can do it. And so that's this show Mad Men, which I think you have, yeah? Yeah. So that's the only reason that Mad Men got made, was because, that was the only reason it could be made, was because the network was willing to take a risk in the short term to become more valuable as a network brand in the future. And this guy who created it goes from being one of the writers on The Sopranos to being one of the most 100 influential people in the world. And if you don't believe me, you can see here. This actually, I found this later. This is the CEO, the head of the AMC network, basically saying that his strategy was to try and get 50 cents per subscriber a month. It was 23 cents before on that other chart. So basically, he could double the amount of money that network made a year by making a creative decision to raise the value of his content to a network. And this is still in the traditional TV model. So where does this go in the future? And I'll be really quick. I know Netflix is here. This is another company that really is about this subscription model, taking content and then adding an ability to recommend other content to you. They keep a monthly subscription model, but then they move it out into over the top and all of these platforms. So another way that this is being used. Another thing that's really important to point out is the fastest growing consumer device in history is the tablet. Faster than PCs, faster than mobile phones, faster than anything. The growth rate has been astounding. And for video, that's not just about people starting to watch a show, what's called initiated views. It's people watching entire videos. People are consuming massive amount of videos on tablets. They're also using their tablets a lot while they're watching TV. They're doing a lot of things, but the real opportunity for the speakers who will talk more about over the top and TV everywhere is how do we get these people who are doing other things engaged back in the show. So just in the few minutes I have left, I'm going to give you some quick examples. Twitter used to collect, a lot of you use Twitter, yeah? So Twitter used to do things like they would gather this data and it was pretty rough. And they didn't really know a lot. It's become extremely sophisticated. There are now Twitter companies that basically create an equivalent of TV ratings. So by using the number of tweets, they can begin to figure out what are the most popular shows on television, and also what are the most popular networks on television in a given week. Facebook, extremely powerful. One real powerful thing for the TV universe is, for example, the Family Guy here has 52 million likes. You can see these are all TV brands. SpongeBob has 32 million likes. As an equivalent at the time, I think Tom Cruise probably had 18 million. Beyonce had maybe 23 million. Television absolutely dominates social media in terms of social engagement. These are all applications that have been developed on the tablet in the last few years for television experiences. What's also interesting is you can see they are done by distributors like DirecTV or Comcast. They're done by new companies, third parties that are just small startups that are creating new TV experiences, and they're done by networks. And there are just massive, massive numbers of these new applications all the time. An example of where this was done really creatively was MTV has something called the Video Music Awards. It has got to the point where the conversations around the celebrities on Twitter are something that are really driving people to watch the shows now. It's almost more interesting than the shows themselves. There was this is Twitter data showing in the Grammys last year how networks were tracking what were people tweeting about when. So you can see when Adele or Chris Brown goes up, the traffic spikes. Jennifer Hudson, not so much. Super Bowl, same thing. Massive. Massive information. I'm going to wrap up. I will let one video play, and if you have any questions for me afterwards, I will be here at the cocktail party. Thank you.
online.
Sorry. Yeah, you want to see this?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, okay. I'll put it back. So this is an example of a network at second screen.
Hello, I'm Conan O'Brien. I purchased this jacket online from a North Korean magician. And seeing it now on camera, I regret it. Up until this moment, your life has had little meaning. But I'm here to change all that. Because I'm here to present the incredible Team Coco tablet app. I hope you're ready for the future. Because the future is sure ready for the you. We'll fix that. It'll get better.
The Team Coco tablet app is a new way to watch Conan on 2 screens, 1 TV and 1 tablet. Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m., just fire up the Team Coco tablet app while watching Conan on TBS. Sit back and let the Team Coco Techno Magic start delivering exclusive content and conversation in sync with the show you're watching.
By the way, anytime anyone says Techno Magic, I make money. Techno Magic. Techno Magic.
You can interact with friends and other fans while behind-the-scenes photos, trivia, and more appear right at your fingertips. You can also go back to previous items. It's as easy as scrolling through the timeline.
This app has access to time travel portals NASA doesn't want you to know about.
That's not.
I know it's not on the cards! Leave it in! Leave it in! You'll see dinosaurs.
Remember, you can use the Team Coco tablet app with any recent episode of Conan, whether you're watching live, on your DVR, or even on a full streaming episode within the app itself.
I smell innovation. And onion. Mustard. Did someone make a sandwich on this?
The Team Coco tablet app also has all the on-demand Conan video clips, slideshows, and blog updates you could ever want.
There you have it. The Team Coco tablet app. It's better than you.